California. This Mexican territory lay so far from Mexico City that its people were called those from the other shore. About 7,000 Californios lived here, mostly along the coast. For many, it was a good life. California's harbors had become busy ports of call for trading ships from many nations. Cowhides from the region were so popular they were known as California banknotes. Among the rancheros who profited most from the growing economy was Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo. His vast land holdings included some 150,000 acres in the Sonoma Valley, north of San Francisco Bay. Over the years, Vallejo had built his reputation and his estate by faithfully serving Mexico as an officer in the army. But like other Californios, Vallejo had come to resent Mexico's neglect of the region. In the 1830s, the isolated Californios began to welcome settlers from other countries. About 60 miles from Vallejo's home, a trading post on the Sacramento River called Sutter's Fort attracted a large colony of immigrants from the United States. Each year brought more wagons streaming across the mountains. The tide was rising in part because of the exploits of a man known as the Pathfinder. Captain John Charles Fremont was arrogant and reckless, but he was also one of the most famous explorers of his time. Fremont's reputation was built on the work of his wife, Jessie, a talented writer who edited his journals and reports into books that inspired thousands to head west. Mariano Vallejo viewed the growing colony of Americans in California with mixed emotions. Vallejo knew too well what had happened in Texas once Americans had outnumbered Mexican settlers.
Vallejo was fascinated with Americans because they represented for him a set of Republican ideals that he had been tracing from his youth from the time he read Rousseau. On the other hand, he also saw that Americans represented a threat to the well-being of California.
In December of 1845, Californios were both puzzled and concerned when Captain John Charles Fremont and 65 heavily armed men made their way out of the snow-laden mountains and into Sutter's Fort. The captain was supposed to be on a mapping mission for the U.S. government, but whatever his skills as an explorer, Fremont was no diplomat. In a dispute with local authorities, the hot-tempered captain planted a U.S. flag on a mountaintop for all to see. Californios were outraged, and Fremont avoided a fight only by heading north to Oregon. Still, the incident reinforced a hard truth for Californios. Their province was ripe for the taking. Mexico could not protect them. Some talked of independence, others of establishing an alliance with Britain or France. 3 months after planting his flag in the mountains, Captain John Fremont came riding back to Sutter's Fort. By now, the U.S. settlers in the area were anxious and angry, certain they would be forced to leave California. No one knows for sure whether Fremont was acting under orders or on his own, but the captain suggested a plan. In the early dawn of June 14, 1846, Mariano Vallejo was awakened by a band of American settlers pounding on his door. Dressed in his military uniform, Vallejo faced the group. "To what happy circumstances," Vallejo is reported to have said, "shall I attribute the visit of so many exalted personages?" The men declared that they were establishing an independent republic in California. General Vallejo was placed under arrest and forced to sign an official surrender. The Americans then helped themselves to Vallejo's brandy and wine. Soon they were shouting at each other, locked in a drunken debate over the wording of their Declaration of Independence. "Choose this day what you shall be," said one. "Either we are robbers or we must be conquerors." Later that morning in the plaza, the rebels raised a homemade flag featuring a crudely fashioned grizzly bear.
The robbers hoisted a piece of linen about the size of a large towel. In it was painted a red bear and a lone star. A band of ungrateful horse thieves, trappers, and runaway sailors. Rosalia Vallejo Lis.
Mariano Vallejo and his brother Salvador were taken under armed escort to Sutter's Fort. Vallejo had hoped that Fremont would release them. Instead, the captain ordered them held prisoner. Sailing in the waters off the California coast, U.S. Commodore John D. Sloat cautiously entered Monterey Harbor. In the event of a declaration of war, his orders were to occupy California's ports and, if possible, to bring about the peaceful annexation of the territory. But when told that Fremont and the Bear Flaggers had started a rebellion, Sloat knew he had to act. Doña Maria de las Angustias de la Guerra remembered the day clearly.
During the morning, the preparations could be seen. Many armed boats filled with men came ashore and took possession without any interference. There was no garrison, and I believe the only Mexican officer present was old Captain Mariano Silva. The conquest of California was not a pleasant event for the Californios, but I must confess that California was on the road to the most complete ruin.
When the Bear Flaggers heard the news from Monterey, they replaced their flag with the Stars and Stripes. The independent Republic of California had lasted just 3 weeks. Five months later, in December of 1846, the exhausted soldiers of Stephen Kearny's command finally reached San Diego. The nearly 2,000-mile journey across the continent had landed them in the thick of war. Californios were fighting back against the U.S. occupation. Just 40 miles from the coast, near the village of San Pascual, Kearny's troops had suffered heavy casualties in a clash with a company of skilled Californio lancers. In late December, U.S. forces advanced on Los Angeles. At San Gabriel and again at La Mesa, the Californios fought bravely, but to no avail.
It was the last stand made by the sons of California for the liberty and independence of their country, whose defense will always do them honor. Guillermo Prieto.
By the time Mariano Vallejo learned of the fall of Los Angeles, he was back in Sonoma, still recovering from his 6-week captivity at Sutter's Fort.
I left Sutter's Fort half dead and arrived here almost without life, but am now much better. The political change has cost a great deal to my person and mind, and likewise to my property. All is lost, and the only hope for making it up is to work again.
Disillusioned with the United States and with Mexico, Vallejo was still forced to choose. In the plaza in front of his home, he carefully folded his Mexican military uniforms into a neat pile and burned them. The war in the borderlands was over. But even with California and New Mexico under U.S. control, President Polk faced a frustrating predicament. He had the territories he wanted for the U.S., but he could not keep them unless Mexico surrendered. And this, Mexico would not do. But the U.S. invasion of Mexico would take place on more than one front. From Santa Fe, Colonel Alexander Doniphan would lead 900 Missouri volunteers into Chihuahua. General John E. Wool would march south from San Antonio. And General Zachary Taylor would prepare his army for a major offensive here on the Rio Grande.